This podcast is part of E2C Network, where we share the whole Auburn experience.
Hello and welcome to War Horses, the only college equestrian podcast that is no longer the only college equestrian podcast. So yeah, there's another one. How about that? We'll talk more about that other college equestrian podcast later on in the show, but for right now, I'm your host Auburn Elvis, and let's talk about some college equestrian. First, we want to take a look at a few meet recaps. So the first one we have is a single discipline meet. This is TCU at Oklahoma State. This one got postponed from a few weeks back because of weather, and then they had to reschedule it here this past Wednesday. On paper, it favored TCU, but the home teams have such a big advantage that I thought that Oklahoma State was going to win this one by about 4 points. Let's see what really happened. Fences went 3-2 for TCU, and horsemanship went 3-2 for TCU. That made the halftime score 6-4 for TCU. So this is pretty encouraging for the visitors. A lead on the road is always something to be happy about, but the home team can really come back on you. We saw Oklahoma State do that in the past seasons ago. They did that. I think Auburn might have been up like 8-2 at the half or something and ended up losing. So a 4-6 deficit is certainly something that can be overcome in the right circumstances. So let's see what happened. In the second half, flat went 3-2 for Oklahoma State. Okay, so you're like, oh, here it is. But then reining went 3-2 for TCU, making the final score 11-9 TCU. So Oklahoma State, they finished their regular season 7-5. They're going to be second in the Big 12 standings when they go into conference tournament season. So yeah, they're going to get ready to face Baylor in the first round of that. For TCU, this was a huge win. They're going to finish first in the Big 12 outright again this year. They swept the Cowgirls this season, which is very big. And now they're going to get ready for Fresno State in the first round of the Big 12 tournament. So yeah, really good way to end the season for TCU. Now we'll look at Centenary at Charleston. This is a single discipline meet. Going into this one, the stats thought that Centenary might make this one close, that it might be, about a 1-point win for Centenary. But then I thought, well, being at home, that's going to help out Charleston. So we'll say it's a tie with a tiebreaker going to Charleston. Well, let's see what really happened. Flat was a 5-0 sweep for Charleston to start the day off. And then fences was 4-1 for Charleston. So that made the final score 9-1 Charleston. So not close at all. Big home win for the Cougars. Centenary can be a dangerous team, but Charleston really handled them. But for Centenary, like I said, the stats suggested that, this should have been a little bit closer, but they only tell you about your past, not your future. So there you go. And the last meet of the regular season was Berry at Charleston. So this one happened the same day. I didn't see Berry and Centenary right against each other, so that didn't work out, but that's okay. Berry at Charleston. Now, the stats thought that Charleston might do better on the flat, but Berry would do real well in fences. And let's see what really happened. This was only a 4-on-4 meet, by the way. Flat went 3-0 for Charleston, and fences went 4-0 for Charleston. So the final score was 7-0 for College of Charleston. Again, the Cougars just went to town. They're riding at the top of their game, heading into the postseason, which is exactly what you want if you're a Cougars fan. For Berry, they didn't have a lot of chance in this one. Charleston is just one of the top 4 teams, and you got to deal with it. And the Vikings just ran into a steamroller. But Berry did have that big win last week, so now they're going to get ready for, I believe, the ODAC tournament is what they're in. That is all of this week's action. That's all of this regular season's actions. We're done with the regular season, y'all. It only took us, 17 weeks? So, yeah, okay. Now, let's take a look at the official Auburn Elvis College Equestrian Rankings. Now, my rankings have not changed. I'll just go ahead and tell you right off the bat. Everything that happened this week was pretty much in line with my rankings, so I don't have to make any changes. But what we will talk about, because again, got a lot of Auburn listeners, want to talk about Auburn just to make it worth their while. So let's do a comparison, or at least an evaluation of the NCEA rankings. Because most of y'all know I come up with my rankings. The NCEA, they come up with their rankings, and then after conference tournament season's done, their rankings are what's going to be the official invitations to those top 8 teams that are dual discipline that are going to make it into the national championship tournament down in Ocala. For the single discipline teams, the top 4 teams. So it hasn't been that important leading up to now, but after these next 2 weeks, 3 weeks, it becomes very important what these rankings are. So the good news is, overall, before we get into this, the good news is, through the ups and downs of the season, there have been at times some big disparities between my rankings, which are the correct ones, and the NCEA rankings. But as we're getting closer here, their rankings are getting closer and closer to what they should be, which is mine. Which is great news for all of us because as you know, every week I reevaluate everybody's darn resumes and I compare them and that's what I go by. They use the force or something. I don't know. They do a lot of, well, I'm going to tell you here in a minute, I'm going to tell you what I think they're going by, and it ain't super encouraging, so maybe y'all should open up some transparency here in the future, but I'm going to leave that all up to y'all. Anyway, let's just get into the rankings. All right. In both sets of rankings, Auburn is number 1. Okay, the Tigers are 11-2. They have the best record in the country, hands down. They were undefeated at home, and they have a pair of road victories over Texas A&M and Oklahoma State that are just better than anybody else's top 2 wins. So, yeah, there's no surprise Auburn's number 1 in both rankings. What is a little surprising is, in my rankings, number 2 is SMU. And the weird thing is that in the NCEA rankings, they have SMU up at number 1 with Auburn, which is weird. And frankly, I don't know that that's ever happened, and I find it a little bit probably intellectually dishonest, and let me tell you about that. Now, the Mustangs are 10-4, okay, which is a good record. It's probably the second best record. They're also undefeated at home, and they have a great road victory over Georgia. That's really the high point of their resume, other than all their home wins, which all the great teams win at home and are undefeated at home. So obviously SMU is a good team, great team even. They just don't have quite as good a resume as Auburn. So why did the voters put SMU at number 1? Well, here is what probably happened. There are some voters that are artificially elevating SMU because SMU does not have a conference tournament that they're heading into here over the next couple of weeks. And those voters have to push SMU on up a little bit so that if some teams around SMU win their conference tournaments, that SMU still has a chance to be maybe number 1, number 2, number 3, somewhere in there. And yeah, that's kind of dumb. I mean, basically, no one can look at Auburn's season and SMU's season and say that SMU is as good as Auburn. Nobody can say that. Even the most ardent SMU fan cannot look at these two resumes and say, oh yeah, this one's pretty much equal to that one, because it ain't. I mean, they just don't have as good a resume as Auburn. And what this means is somebody's going to end up getting screwed by all this favoritism that is being shown to SMU because they don't have a conference tournament. And that team that's going to get screwed probably is TCU. All right. Now, Auburn's going to be all right, because if Auburn wins the SEC, they're going to end up number 1 outright overall. Okay. And if Auburn does not win the SEC tournament, they'll drop down to 2 or 3. But that's what would happen even if Auburn was 1 and SMU was number 2. Okay. So the final result is all in Auburn's hands. So Auburn's not going to get screwed no matter what happens. Okay. If Auburn doesn't win the SEC tournament, that's on Auburn. Okay. So there you go. But the big deal here is TCU, because they're in a position where if they win the Big 12 tournament, it's going to be hard for voters to move TCU above SMU with this favoritism that we're seeing. But if SMU was number 2 instead of number 1, where, they should be number 2, then if TCU does win that conference championship, they probably would jump over SMU into number 2 because they would deserve it. So that's what I think is going on. Now, you might say, well, what's the big deal? 2 versus 3, is that really significant? Well, here's why it is significant, okay? So let's assume that the conference tournaments go as expected, okay? The number 2 seed in the national championship tournament is going to face the number 7 seed, okay? So that would mean that the 2 seed is either going to be SMU or TCU, and they're going to face one of these 3 teams. It's either going to be South Carolina, Baylor, or Fresno State is going to be that number 7, okay? That's what you're looking at. Conversely, when you look at who the 3 seed is going to face in Ocala, the 3 seed is going to face either Georgia, Texas A&M, or Oklahoma State. And brothers and sisters, let me tell you, there is a world of difference in those two groups of teams. It matters greatly whether you are number 2 or number 3. So for the voters to go in and kind of tinker with the rankings to try to make up for the fact that SMU ain't got no conference tournament, that is intellectually dishonest, and it is going to have consequences for TCU if that works out in a way that I'm afraid it might, because TCU is going to end up facing a much tougher opponent than they should be facing, even though they would have put together a better resume than SMU, and SMU just ain't in a conference. But that ain't nobody's fault but SMU, because they're the ones that decided to go independent. So they don't need the help, is what I'm saying. SMU's had a fine season. Right now they're number 2, or they should be, and if they slide down to number 3 because TCU went out and won the Big Darn 12 and Auburn went out and won the SEC, well, you know what? Sorry, SMU. That's just how it works. You knew that. But to get there and artificially inflate things just so that you can sort of keep SMU at number 2, even if those other things happen, man, that ain't right. And I tell you, y'all in the sport, you athletes, you parents, you coaches, y'all should start calling for a little bit more transparency in the rankings and the seedings, especially if TCU winds up the Big 12 winner and ends up number 3 in the darn rankings, because they will have earned more than that, frankly. But anyway, so let's hope that don't happen. Let's hope that the voters have a come-to-Jesus moment, and that the Auburn, if they win the SEC, they'll end up number 1. If Big 12 goes to TCU, that they end up number 2. And then SMU slides down to number 3, and that's just the way it works. Let's hope that ends up happening. Or let's hope that teams lose and get some upsets in these conference tournaments, because then, okay, it's not as cut and dry, and you can accept some of these, personal valuations. But right now, I mean, there's just no reason to put SMU on the same level as Auburn, and the only reason you could be doing it is because you're trying to artificially inflate SMU so that they're not hurt by the fact they ain't got a conference tournament. So anyway, all right, so on we go to number 3, and as you guessed it, number 3 is TCU. Okay, at least in my rankings. Actually, in both rankings, TCU is number 3. It's just the distance between them and SMU. In mine, it's pretty close, especially after they beat Oklahoma State at Oklahoma State this week. The Frogs are 8-4, and they are the 3rd and last undefeated home team in the nation. And their resume has a road win over Georgia, and like I said, that road win over Oklahoma State. Again, when I recompare TCU and SMU, it is very close, okay? TCU has better wins, but they also have a worse loss when you look at who's lost. They lost on the road at Baylor, and a lot of teams can beat Baylor at Baylor, so the fact they didn't do that kind of hurts them. So also, when you look at the margin of victory in a lot of these home-and-home series, SMU had a better margin of victory than TCU. So right now, I'm okay at having SMU at number 2. If you have TCU at number 2, that's fine. But it is very, very close between the resumes of TCU and SMU. And there you go. Okay, number 4, Texas A&M. The Aggies are 7-6. They lost at home to number 1 Auburn to finish their season, but they still have a good record overall that is just a tiny bit better than Georgia's, in my opinion. Now, this week's rankings are going to come out after this podcast is recorded. Last week, the voters had Oklahoma State at number 4, but they did lose at home to TCU, so the voters just have to move them down a little bit. So I feel confident that the voters are going to get this one right, and they're going to put Texas A&M at number 4 where they belong. Now, number 5 in my rankings is Georgia. The Bulldogs are 6-5, and I said it last week that they had some early fall losses at home that really hurt their resume, but ever since that home win over Auburn, they have looked very strong, okay? You really couldn't believe that they would have lost twice at home, as well as Georgia is riding, but they did, and we got to take that into account. So I think the voters may slide Oklahoma State down here to number 5. A lot of the voters just really want Oklahoma State to be up in the top 3 or 4, but the Cowgirls just don't have the wins to justify it. So we're going to see how that goes. But for right now, Georgia's number 5 in my rankings, and hopefully they'll be number 5 in the NCEAs as well. And that makes number 6, Oklahoma State.
Yeehaw!
The Cowgirls are 7-5. Oklahoma State is a good team, all right? But they keep dropping meets that they probably should not, so number 6 seems about right for them. Now, they could go on a run like they did last year. They could win the Big 12, and if they do, they're going to hop back up the rankings. But for now, they're number 6, and that's where they deserve. All right, number 7, South Carolina. The Gamecocks are 6-5. The voters got this one right, okay? The Gamecocks have looked good at times, and number 7 is just the perfect place for them right now, given their resume. All right, so for the last spot that would get into Ocala if the season ended today, well, if everything ended today, let's talk about that, okay? And frankly, basically, we're just talking about 2 teams at this point. We're talking about Fresno State and Baylor. I'm not even going to go to number 9 and number 10 this week just because this is all that matters is number 8. For almost all season long, Fresno State has looked better than Baylor, okay? But recently, Baylor has really come on strong. And at this moment, their resume is basically a little bit better than Fresno State's. And, you know, I could see if you've got Fresno State at number 8, and I think that's where NCEA voters have them, and you've got Baylor down at number 9, all right, I can accept that. I'm not going to criticize that. But here's the thing. If you agree with me and think Baylor should be number 8, or if you agree with the NCEA voters and think that it should be Fresno State, it really doesn't matter, because the good news for everybody is that these 2 teams are going to show us which of them is better. Because the way these tournaments work, by having a consolation meet, one of these teams has to get at least one win in the Big 12 tournament, and it's probably going to come over each other. So, and whoever wins, that team will end up either number 7 or number 8 in the rankings. Just kind of depends on how good South Carolina looks over in the SEC tournament. But I think South Carolina's probably going to stay up at number 7. I don't know. Maybe South Carolina slips down to number 8. We don't know. But I'll just tell you that one of the teams of Baylor and Fresno State is not going to make it to Ocala. All right. And it will be the team that gets no wins in the Big 12 tournament. So, yeah, sorry for whoever that is, but at least you know what's in front of you. All right. Win and advance. Lose and go home. That's where we are. Okay, now let's look at the single discipline rankings. This one's a little bit tricky because you don't have as many meets to look at, so there's a lot more subjectivity here. I still have some pretty good justifications for where I put people, but, anyway, let's talk about it. Now, the number 2 teams, the top 2 teams here, are correct in both sets of rankings, okay? Number 1 is Sweetbriar. The Vixens are 6-2. They split a home and home with Lynchburg. Lynchburg has the margin of victory advantage in those, but the Vixens are undefeated at home, whereas the Hornets are not. So for me, easy decision. Sweetbriar's number 1, and the NCAA voters finally agree. Yes, Vixens number 1. Number 2 is Lynchburg. The Hornets are 6-5. They would be number 1 if their resume didn't have that home loss to Charleston and a road loss to Swanee. But there you go. But the voters finally slid the Hornets down to number 2. Number 3 is where I think the voters are a little wrong, but I can kind of deal with it because it's going to work itself out. All right. I have Charleston number 3. The Cougars are 4-3. Yeah, and I think they're the 3rd best team because they did beat Lynchburg in Lynchburg, and nobody has done that maybe ever. I still haven't gone back and looked that up, but it's very rare. It's probably only happened one other time if it's happened at all. Now, the voters have Dartmouth at number 3, but like I said, it's going to work itself out because those teams are probably going to meet in the ECAC tournament, and that's going to settle who's better between those 2 teams. So like I said, I have Dartmouth at number 4. The voters have Charleston at number 4. But the Green, they're 4-3, and we're going to see how all these teams do in their conference tournaments, and that's going to settle things. Okay. Now let's look at some of the other teams. Number 5 in both sets of rankings is Swanee. The Tigers are 5-4, and this is really the appropriate place for them. Swanee is one of those teams where if they get hot, they could upset one of the teams above them, but on most days, they're probably the 5th best team. So we'll see how the postseason goes for the Tigers. I think they did go to Ocala last year. They're probably not going to go this year. Charleston probably bumped them out of that spot. So for the rest of the rankings, this is where the NCAA rankings stop. So that is all of the rankings and how they compare between my rankings, which again are correct, and the NCEA rankings, which still need a little bit of help. That's okay, though. They're getting closer. All right, now we are into conference tournament season, okay? And we actually have a conference tournament that is coming up this week. We have some single discipline action. The ECAC and the ODAC are the two conferences that do single discipline riding. And if you get confused between the ODAC and the ECAC, just remember ECAC has Dartmouth and Charleston. Okay, the ODAC has Sweetbriar and Lynchburg. Okay, now there's other teams in there, but that's who you got to remember. Okay, the ECAC stands for Eastern Coast Athletic Conference, and they come first in the alphabet, and they come first on our schedule. They're happening this week. Next weekend's going to be the ODAC. All right, so you ain't got to think about them this week. ECAC. Okay, remember, Charleston, Dartmouth. That's what you're looking at. Now, the season was pretty much dominated by Charleston and Dartmouth, and I think Centenary and Sacred Heart are the other two teams in this conference. Centenary actually isn't listed in anything on their schedule about what's a conference meet and what isn't, and all the teams in the ODAC don't have Centenary on their schedules listed as conference meet, so I think Centenary is in the ECAC, but again, a lot of these teams at this lower level don't really put a lot of information out there, so it's kind of tough to tell. And again, I got to go ahead and go with this podcast before everything gets announced, so this is where it is. So that means, anyway, that the conference tournament is probably going to be number 1 Dartmouth versus number 4 Centenary. And that's if Centenary's in the conference. They might not even be in that conference. If they're not, Dartmouth is going to be the number 1 seed and get a bye, okay? So there you go. But the other side of the bracket is number 2 seed Charleston going up against number 3 seed Sacred Heart. Now, Dartmouth, if they ride against Centenary, they're probably going to win. Okay, it's probably going to be 7-1, 8-1 Dartmouth. If Centenary ain't even in the darn conference, then guess who's going to win that? Dartmouth, because it's a bye. Anybody can beat a bye. So what we're really talking about is how is that Charleston versus Sacred Heart meet going to go? Well, in the regular seasons, these teams swapped home and home. So they are of comparable ability. But the overall margin tips pretty much Charleston's way. So I expect the Cougars are going to win this one probably 6-2 or 7-3, depending on if this is 4-on-4 or 5-on-5. Now, if that happens, that's going to give us a final between Dartmouth and Charleston. These teams traded home victories. They had the same margin of victory. Looking at the stats, these teams are very close. Charleston's starting lineup averages about 4.8 points per meet, whereas Dartmouth's starting lineup averages 4.7. So very, very close. A tenth of a point. They're very close in terms of how they ride. So this is going to be a good championship meet if we end up with this. Now, if Charleston gets upset, then, you're looking at Sacred Heart in this final, but I don't hold out a lot of hope for Sacred Heart. They're just not as good as the other two teams this year. That's okay. So looking at this event, Dartmouth seems to have, and again, I'm talking about Dartmouth versus Charleston. Dartmouth has a slight advantage over fences, and Charleston has a slight advantage on the flat. So this is really going to be who can protect the things they're good at well and get some points away in the event that they're not as good. I think this one's going to end up a 5-5 tie, and I think the Cougars are going to get the tiebreaker win. So my pick for the conference champion in the ECAC is Charleston. I think they're going to win it. So we'll see how it goes. Well, that's all that we have to talk about in the postseason tournament this week. This is our first postseason tournament. We'll have some others next week. But before we go, I want to talk to you about the other college equestrian podcast that is out there. Two of TCU's former riders, Reagan Rast and Madison Buchanan, they have started a podcast called WEQ Weekly. And they do a dang good job, all right? They give you recaps, they interview riders and coaches, and they're not as impolite as I am, okay? It's probably because they have better upbringing. But yeah, they're not going to go off on a rant talking about the NCEA voters and intellectual dishonesty, about having SMU too high. They might think all that, but they just won't say it. So, but even without that, they have a very good podcast, so you should go look them up, give them a listen, WEQ Weekly. So, yes. But after you do that, you can come back next week and you can listen to this podcast. I am your host, Auburn Elvis. Well, thank you very much for listening, and war horses.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode on the E2C Network. On your way out, I want to remind you to stop by e2cnetwork.com. It's your one-stop shop for all our content across our podcast, YouTube channel, and much more. To stay up to date with us, make sure you're following social media accounts such as Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. While our content here may always be Auburn sports heavy, if it's orange and blue, it's what we do. War Eagle.